The silver moon pin was cold against her fingers. Cecilia Ellington stood before the small oval mirror in the guest chamber and pressed the pin gently beneath the collar of her dark cloak, hiding it the way she had hidden everything for the past 3 months. The pin was simple. A crescent moon, no larger than a coin, etched in pure silver, with a tiny wolf howling at its center. To anyone who did not know what it meant, it looked like an old family trinket, but it was not a trinket. It was the mark of the Luna of the Royal Carrington Pack, the secret sign of the most powerful Alpha King in the realm. Cecilia adjusted her cloak and stepped back from the mirror. She studied the woman looking back at her. The deep blue gown beneath the cloak was modest but elegant, cut to show strength rather than status. Her dark hair was pulled back in soft waves, and her face was calm. Too calm, perhaps, for a woman about to walk into a hall full of wolves who believed she was broken. She had received the invitation 4 days ago. It had arrived in a cream envelope sealed with the Pembroke family crest, a silver stag on a green field. The script inside was beautiful and formal, as if the words had been chosen to disguise what they really meant. You are cordially invited to the Grand Mooncrest Gathering, where Alpha Cassius Pembroke, of the Silver Ridge Pack, will announce his formal moon bond to Miss Lillian Rothwell. Cecilia had read the name twice. Then she had set the envelope down on the table beside her tea and gone to the window. Outside, the forest of Moonvale stretched wide and dark under the late afternoon sky. She had grown up in that forest. She had run through those trees as a girl, chasing fireflies and learning the names of every plant by moonlight. She had loved Moonvale Pack the way you love the place that shaped you, completely and without question. She had loved Cassius the same way, once. She remembered the day he rejected her. He had not shouted. He had not been cruel in any visible, obvious way. He had simply smiled at her across the study of his family's house. That polished, comfortable smile he used when he wanted something to go smoothly, and told her that he had made a decision. He said she was too quiet, too small in her ambitions, too soft for the future he was building. He said it gently, almost kindly, as if he were doing her a favor. And then he said he had already spoken to Lillian Rothwell's father about a formal introduction. Cecilia had nodded. She had thanked him for his honesty. She had walked out of the study with her back straight and her face composed, and she had not let herself cry until she reached the far edge of the Moonvale forest, where no one could hear her. That had been 11 months ago. A great deal had changed since then. 3 months ago, in the old northern chapel where the stone walls smelled of rain and silver candles, Cecilia Ellington had stood before Dominic Carrington and spoken the ancient Luna vow. There had been only 2 witnesses, Willow Carrington, Dominic's younger sister, and Gideon Lancaster, the one council member Dominic trusted without reservation. The ceremony had taken less than an hour. The bond had settled into her bones like the deepest roots of the oldest tree in the forest, quiet and permanent and absolutely certain. Dominic had looked at her across the silver flame and said nothing beyond the vow. He did not need to. The way he looked at her said everything. That she was not a prize, not a strategy, not a symbol. She was a person he had chosen with full and deliberate understanding of who she was. But then, he had asked her for something difficult. He had asked her to remain hidden. The royal council was compromised. Someone close to the throne was leaking information to rival packs, and until Dominic knew who that person was, any public announcement about a new Luna would give the enemy a direct target. Cecilia had listened to the full explanation, and then she had agreed, because she understood duty, and she understood danger, and she trusted the man standing across the silver flame from her. Understanding, however, did not make it painless. For 3 months she had walked through whispers. She had stood in markets and pack gatherings and social halls while women like Florence Lancaster said her name with pity, and men like Cassius used her as proof that some women simply could not hold a mate. She had carried a crown that no one could see, and now Cassius was inviting her to watch him make Lillian Rothwell his moon-bonded mate, in the same hall where their families had celebrated together for years. She understood exactly what the invitation was. It was not kindness. It was performance. Cassius wanted her there, so that the room could see the contrast. Him, triumphant, ascending, paired with the right woman. And her, still alone, still unmated, still the woman he had been wise enough to leave behind. He wanted her to stand in that room and feel small. Cecilia picked up her cloak from the bed and drew it over her shoulders. She was going, not to beg, not to make a scene, not to prove anything to anyone who had already decided what she was. She was going because the woman Cassius Pembroke had abandoned deserved to stand in that room one final time and not look away. She reached for the door. By sunset, every wolf who had laughed at Cecilia Ellington would learn that silence was not the same as shame. Mooncrest Hall had been standing for 200 years. It was built from pale gray stone, quarried from the mountains east of Silverfen, and the walls were thick enough that you could feel their age before you saw it. Silver lanterns hung from iron chains along every corridor, and the great hall itself stretched wide and high beneath a ceiling carved with moons in every phase, from the thinnest sliver to the full round brightness of the wolf moon. Tonight, every lantern was lit, every banner was pressed and hung, and the floors had been polished to a mirror shine that reflected the firelight in long golden ribbons. It was the kind of gathering that made wolves remember who they were supposed to be. Every major family was present. The Pembrokes occupied the east wing of the hall, arranged around Cassius the way flowers arrange themselves around the stem, decorative and dependent. The Rothwells had claimed the area nearest the main table, which told Cecilia everything she needed to know about how much Raphael Rothwell expected this evening to benefit him. The Lancasters and Wentworths clustered near the fireplace, and the Stratfords, led by Lawrence Stratford, senior Royal Council advisor, stood close to the north wall, where the archive records were stored. Lawrence always kept himself near records. Cecilia had noticed that even before she understood why. She arrived quietly. She did not announce herself. She did not sweep in with attendants or wear something designed to turn heads. She simply walked through the great hall doors in her deep blue gown and dark cloak, and accepted a glass of moonberry wine from a servant near the entrance. And then she found a place near the carved window on the western wall, where the light was softer. The whispers began almost immediately. She heard her name pass from mouth to ear to mouth, the way a cold wind passes through dry leaves. Quickly, without effort, as if the air itself were participating. Florence Lancaster, standing 3 feet away with her back turned, as if she believed that made her invisible, leaned close to Maeve Wentworth and said softly that Cecilia was brave to come tonight, given everything. Maeve Wentworth's response was equally soft, and equally certain of being overheard. Bravery and desperation often look alike, don't they? Florence made a small, agreeable sound. Cecilia took a slow sip of her wine and looked out the carved window at the dark line of trees beyond the courtyard. The Moonvale Forest was visible from here on clear nights. She could see the tops of the pines, silver black against the late sky. She was not desperate. She was not brave in the way they meant the word, a word they used to describe someone doing something foolish with their chin held high. She was simply present, and presence, she had learned, was its own kind of answer. The hall filled gradually. More pack families arrived. More wine was poured. The musicians in the gallery above played something slow and elegant, and the conversation rose to match it. Cecilia stood at her window and watched the room without appearing to watch it, the way she had always been good at watching things. It was one of the skills Cassius had called ordinary. He had not understood that observation was not passivity. It was intelligence. Then Cassius arrived. He entered from the east corridor with Lillian Rothwell on his arm, and the room responded to him the way rooms always responded to Cassius, with attention, with warmth, with the instinctive leaning of people towards someone who carries himself as though he has already been decided upon. He was handsome. Cecilia had never denied that. Tall, with dark gold hair, and sharp features, and eyes the pale gray of winter water. Cassius Pembroke moved through a room with a particular kind of confidence that looked like ease, but was actually extremely calculated. He knew where to walk to be seen. He knew when to laugh, so the sound carried. He knew how to make everyone in his immediate area feel that they were standing in the most important spot. Lillian Rothwell stood perfectly beside him, in a gown the color of pale gold, her auburn hair swept up and her smile arranged with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, perfectly finished, leaving nothing to chance. Her father, Raphael, stood a few feet behind them, watching the room with the satisfied expression of a man reviewing a successful investment. Cassius saw Cecilia within 30 seconds. She knew he would. She was standing in a clear line of sight from the eastern corridor, and there was no way a man with Cassius Pembroke's awareness of a room would fail to locate the one person in it whose presence was both expected and inconvenient. He excused himself from Lillian with a brief word and crossed the hall. The people nearest to Cecilia noticed his approach and began to drift in small, natural-looking directions, the way water moves around a stone, creating a small, cleared space around the window where Cassius and Cecilia now faced each other. Cassius smiled. It was the same smile from the study, 11 months ago. "Still unmated, Cecilia?" He said it lightly, pleasantly, as if they were old friends catching up, as if he had not designed the question to land in the specific way it landed, in the ears of every wolf standing within 20 feet, on the evening he was announcing his own bond. The hall around them quieted by degrees. Conversations thinned, faces turned. People pretended not to listen, which meant they were listening with complete attention. Cecilia looked at him calmly. "Congratulations on your announcement, Cassius," she said. "I hope your new bond gives you everything you deserve." The line was polite, the tone was gracious, but something in the phrasing made a few people near the fireplace exchange a quick look. Because everything you deserve could mean something entirely different, depending on how much the speaker knew about you. Cassius either missed it or chose not to care. His smile widened slightly, and he tilted his head in the particular way he used when he was pressing something. "No alpha waiting in the wings, then?" he asked. "I always hoped someone would take you on. The quiet ones need someone patient." Lillian had drifted over, drawn by instinct or design, and stood at Cassius's shoulder now. She did not say anything yet. She simply existed in the conversation, the way a trophy exists in a glass case, present, polished, and meant to be noticed. Cecilia set her wineglass down on the windowsill, with a soft, deliberate sound. "I have never needed patience from anyone, Cassius," she said. "But it is kind of you to be concerned." She could feel the room listening. She could feel Florence Lancaster standing very still. She could feel Maeve Wentworth, regretting the comment about desperation. Cassius opened his mouth to speak again. She could see the next question forming, something sharper, something designed to make the pause before her answer feel like defeat. And then the great hall doors opened. Not the east corridor doors, not the side entrance, the great doors. The ones that had not opened once since the gathering began, because they were reserved for arrivals of significance. Royal guards entered first. 6 of them, in black leather armor, with silver wolves at the chest, moving with the kind of precision that does not come from discipline alone, but from knowing that the person behind you warrants perfection. They arranged themselves in a double line just inside the doors, without being commanded, without a single sound, beyond the soft placement of boots on stone. And then Dominic Carrington walked into Mooncrest Hall. Cassius Pembroke stopped smiling. The room did not react to Dominic Carrington the way it reacted to Cassius. When Cassius entered a room, people turned toward him with recognition and warmth, the comfortable delight of seeing someone familiar and attractive. When Dominic entered, the response was different. It was older. It ran deeper than recognition. It was the response that lives in the part of a wolf that remembers, beyond names and families and politics, what a true alpha feels like when he stands within 20 feet of you. Every elder in the room inclined their head. Every pack, alpha straightened their spine. Conversations did not stop. They simply lost their grip, the way a flame loses its grip on a candle in a strong wind, and faded out without anyone intending them to. Dominic was tall, broader through the shoulders than Cassius by a clear measure, and dressed in black ceremonial armor that bore the Royal Carrington wolf in silver relief across the chest. He wore no crown. He had never needed one. His face was controlled in the specific way that faces are controlled when a person has learned that every expression they make in a public room becomes something other people remember and repeat. His eyes were dark, the dark of deep forest water, and they moved across the hall with a thoroughness that was not aggression. It was simply complete. August Vanderbilt, one of the most senior elders of the northern families, broke from his group near the banquet table and crossed the floor toward Dominic, with the urgency of a man, pretending he had been expecting this. August was old enough and well-connected enough to understand that when the Alpha King appeared, without announcement at a pack gathering, the correct response was immediate and visible loyalty. "My Lord Carrington," August said, bowing low, "we are honored by your presence." "Had we known," Dominic gave him a brief nod, not dismissive, simply complete. The nod of a man who has acknowledged what needed to be acknowledged, and is now moving on to the thing that actually brought him here. His eyes continued their sweep of the hall, past the Vanderbilt group, past the Rothwell table, past Lawrence Stratford near the north wall, who had gone very still, in a way that was different from the stillness of surprise, past Cassius, who was still standing near the western window with Lillian at his side, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and calculation. And then Dominic's gaze found Cecilia. Something moved through the room. It was not visible, and it made no sound, but every wolf present felt it. That subtle shift in the air that happens when a very powerful person gives away, in a single unguarded moment, where their attention actually lives. He walked toward her. The crowd shifted without being asked, the way water shifts when something moves through it, not parting exactly, but rearranging itself naturally around the path he was taking, because standing between Dominic Carrington and the direction he was walking felt instinctively unwise. Cassius did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, 3 feet from Cecilia, and watched the Alpha King cross the great hall of Mooncrest directly toward the woman he had mocked 20 seconds ago. Lillian's perfectly arranged smile went perfectly still. Dominic stopped in front of Cecilia. He was close enough that she had to tilt her chin slightly to meet his gaze. She had stood this close to him in the northern chapel, in the dim candlelight, with the silver flame between them. And even then, even with the formal words of the ancient vow still hanging in the air, his presence had carried this same quality. Steady, unmoved, and entirely directed at her. "My Luna," he said quietly. The words were not loud. He did not project them for the room's benefit. He said them the way you say something true, in the natural tone of a man stating something he considers settled fact. But the hall was silent enough that every wolf heard them. For one breath, the world seemed to narrow to the space between Cecilia and Dominic. She looked up at him, and felt the 3 months of silence pressing against the back of her chest. Not resentment, not quite, but the particular ache of something real that has been kept in a smaller space than it deserved. Relief moved through her, and something else. Something older and steadier. The bone-deep certainty of a bond that had existed in the dark for months, and was now stepping into the light. She placed her hand in his. Behind him, Cassius made a sound. A short, contained sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh or the end of an assumption. "Is this? What is this? A royal protection arrangement?" Dominic turned his head toward Cassius. Not his body, just his head, with the unhurried precision of someone who has no need to brace themselves for any conversation. "Protection is offered to those who cannot stand on their own," Dominic said. His voice was even, without heat. "Cecilia has never needed that from anyone." He turned back to the room. When Dominic Carrington addressed a gathering, he did not raise his voice. He simply spoke with a quality of certainty that made every other sound feel optional. "Cecilia Ellington is the Luna of the Royal Carrington Pack," he said. "Our bond was sealed 3 months ago, in the northern chapel under the ancient silver rite, witnessed by lawful parties, and bound by the old vow. The bond is permanent, recognized, and complete." He paused for a moment, and when he continued, his tone carried something beneath the formal words, a weight that belonged not to the Alpha King, but to the man. The union was kept from public record temporarily, because the court faced a threat that required concealment. That concealment was a decision of strategy, not of uncertainty. There was never any uncertainty about Cecilia. He looked at her as he said that last part, not performing it for the room, just saying it directly to her. The great hall of Mooncrest, 200 years old, filled with the oldest families of the realm, arranged in their finest clothes beneath the carved moon ceiling, went very quiet. Florence Lancaster had her hand over her mouth. Maeve Wentworth had the expression of a woman reviewing every word she had said in the past 11 months, and finding all of them. Cassius stood with the expression of a man who has just been given information that completely reorders everything he thought he understood about the last year of his life. And Lillian Rothwell, poised, polished, perfect Lillian, had gone slightly pale beneath her beautiful gown. Cecilia stood with her hand in Dominic's hand, and felt the invisible crown she had been wearing in silence finally settle into a position where the rest of the world could see it. She did not smile to perform joy for the room. She did not look at Cassius to see his face. She looked at Dominic, who was looking at her with the same expression he had worn across the silver flame in the northern chapel, quiet, certain, and entirely decided. Near the north wall, Lawrence Stratford had not moved at all since Dominic entered the room. He was not shocked. His face was controlled in the careful way of someone working very hard to appear surprised by something that has instead made them afraid. Cecilia noticed him. She noticed the way he was not reacting, and in the quiet clarity of the moment, with Dominic's hand warm around hers, and the entire hall reorganizing itself around a truth it had not expected, a small and precise thought settled into her mind. Lawrence Stratford had known, or he had suspected, or he had feared. And fear, in a man like Lawrence, never existed without reason. The private council chamber adjoined the great hall through a narrow corridor lined with old portraits of pack leaders in silver frames. The corridor was cool and dim, and blessedly quiet after the charged air of the gathering, and Cecilia breathed it in slowly as Dominic led her through it. Behind them, the hall was already restoring itself to sound, the particular high, rushing murmur of 200 wolves processing something unexpected. Cecilia could imagine the conversations starting and starting again. She could imagine Florence Lancaster choosing her words very carefully. She could imagine Cassius standing somewhere in the middle of it all, recalculating. She would think about that later. The council chamber was round, with a high window that looked out over the eastern courtyard, where the moon had risen above the treetops, full and white and enormous. A fire burned in the iron grate. The room smelled of old cedar and candle smoke, and the faint mineral sharpness of silver, which was built into the walls of any room where important things were decided. Dominic closed the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The formality of the great hall fell away, the way armor falls away when a soldier finally reaches somewhere safe. He was not the Alpha King in this room. He was the man who had asked her to do something very hard, and had watched her do it without complaint for 3 months, and who now stood with the particular stillness of someone who is deciding how to begin an honest conversation. Cecilia spoke first. "I understood why it was necessary," she said quietly. She was looking at the fire. "I want you to know that I understood it every single day. The danger was real. Your reasoning was sound. I never doubted the bond." She paused. "But understanding why something is painful does not make it stop hurting." Dominic was very still for a moment. Then he moved to the chair near the fire and sat, not with the controlled authority of his public posture, but with the plain heaviness of a person setting something down. "Every time I heard a rumor about you," he said, "I wanted to end it immediately. Every time someone in the court made a comment about the woman Cassius Pembroke had rejected, I had to hold the decision in place by force." Cecilia turned to look at him. "Then why did you choose me?" she asked. "Not as a strategy, not because I was available or convenient or politically useful. I want to know the real reason." Dominic met her eyes. "I watched you after Cassius rejected you," he said. "Not closely. At first. I was passing through Moonvale on council business, and I saw you at the South Market. You had just heard a public comment. I do not know exactly what was said, but I saw the moment you heard it. I saw your face." He stopped for a moment, as if choosing the right words carefully. "You did not look humiliated. You looked like someone making a decision. You closed something in yourself, smoothly and without drama, and you continued walking. You asked the market seller about his herbs. You listened to his answer fully. You paid him and thanked him by name." Cecilia remembered the market. She did not remember being watched. Most people, when they are hurt in public, do one of two things, Dominic continued. They perform their pain to make others feel guilty for causing it, or they perform strength to make others feel they failed to wound them. You did neither. You simply remained yourself, a person who was still interested in the world around her, despite the fact that the world had just been unkind. He held her gaze. That is extremely rare. And I came back to Moonvale twice more before I allowed myself to admit what I was doing. Cecilia felt something in her chest shift. Not dramatically, but the way furniture shifts in a room when you move it to its correct place, and realize it should always have been there. I thought about the secrecy, she admitted, in the quiet months. I thought about whether part of you had looked at me more clearly after the ceremony, and found something you could not tell me. Dominic shook his head once, firmly. No, Cecilia, you were not hidden because you were something to be ashamed of. You were hidden because you were the thing most worth protecting. Those are opposite problems. He leaned forward. And I am going to tell you something now that I need you to hear clearly. The threat that made secrecy necessary, it is not resolved. It is here, in this hall, in this gathering, and I believe the person at the center of it is someone who was relieved by your absence from my public life. Because your presence, it turns out, is dangerous to them. Cecilia straightened slightly. Lawrence Stratford. Dominic looked at her. What made you? He did not react when you walked in, Cecilia said. Everyone else in that room was surprised. Florence Lancaster nearly dropped her wine. August Vanderbilt looked as if he had not taken a breath in 30 seconds. Even Cassius, who was standing right next to me, had an expression I have never seen on his face before. But Lawrence Stratford was still. Not surprised still. Afraid still. There is a difference. Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then he rose, and went to the small cabinet beside the window, and withdrew a leather case. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside were sealed reports, patrol records bound in black cord, and several folded letters with the marks of various alliance families on the outer folds. These are the documents I have been gathering, he said. My own advisors have reviewed them 3 times, and cannot find the pattern. Cecilia came to stand beside him at the table, and looked at what was spread before her. The firelight made the documents warm and amber. She reached out and picked up the first patrol record. Her eyes moved quickly and quietly, the way they always moved when she was reading something that mattered. How long have you been collecting these? She asked. 5 months. And the advisors who reviewed them, were any of their reports also routed through Stratford's office before reaching you? Dominic paused. Possibly. Then they were reviewing documents that had already been handled by the person responsible for altering them, Cecilia said. They would not have found anything. You cannot see the difference in a letter when you have already been given a version of it to believe is correct. She set the patrol record down and picked up one of the folded alliance letters. She held it toward the firelight, tilting it carefully. There, she said. The date on this letter has been altered. The original number was written higher on the line. You can see the faint impression of the first ink. Someone changed it to make this meeting appear to have occurred before the border incident, which would mean the Eastern Pac was in contact with your allies before the threat, not after. But that is not what actually happened. She set it down and looked at him. Someone has been moving your warriors away from the eastern border by making it look like your allies requested it. And at the same time, they have been making sure your personal life looked unstable enough that any decision you made could be questioned. Dominic looked at the letter. Then he looked at her. 3 months, he said quietly. I have had some of the best strategic minds in the realm reviewing these for 3 months. They were looking for a traitor, Cecilia said. I am looking at a pattern. Those are different problems. Something changed in his face. Not dramatically, but in the particular way that something changes when a person recognizes that the help they needed has been standing quietly in front of them for longer than they realized. I need you with me when I review the rest of these, he said. I know, she replied simply. I have always been good with records. Outside the council chamber window, the moon was full and high and very bright. Inside, the woman who had spent 3 months hiding her crown began, quietly and precisely, to understand what it was made for. The morning after a revelation is a particular kind of morning. It arrives with the same light as any other morning, the same birdsong, the same ordinary sounds of a hall coming awake, servants in corridors, fires being stoked, the distant clatter of preparation in the kitchens. But the people inside it are different. They are carrying the weight of something they learned the night before, and until they decide what to do with it, they are very careful about how they arrange their faces. Cecilia walked the main corridor alone, and the difference was immediate and complete. Every wolf she passed acknowledged her. Some bowed, deeply and with visible sincerity. Some offered greetings that were so precisely warm, they had clearly been practiced since the night before. A young woman from the Wentworth family pressed herself against the wall and dipped her chin with the solemnity of someone who had given this gesture serious thought. Cecilia thanked each person simply and kept walking. She saw the truth clearly, the way you see something clearly, when the morning light hits it at the right angle. Nothing about her had changed between yesterday and today. She was the same woman who had stood at the carved window with her moonberry wine and heard Florence Lancaster decide she was brave or desperate. The same woman who had listened to Maeve Wentworth's whisper. The same woman who had answered Cassius's mockery with a politeness that cost her more control than anyone in that room understood. She had not become worthy overnight. She had always been worthy. The Bows were not honoring the person she had become. They were acknowledging the title they could finally see. That knowledge was not bitter. It was simply honest. And honesty, Cecilia had found, was the one thing that could move through hurt without making it worse. She had just reached the garden courtyard, a square of pale stone with an old silver-barked tree at its center, its branches wide and winter-bare against the morning sky, when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew them before she turned. She had known the rhythm of those footsteps for years. Cassius Pembroke looked different in the morning light than he had in the great hall. The performance had been stripped away by sleep and consequence, and what remained was simply a man who was not entirely comfortable with himself, standing in a courtyard, trying to decide how to begin. "Cecilia," he said. "Cassius," she replied. He came to stand a few feet away from her, near the old tree. He had his hands behind his back, a posture she recognized as the one he used when he was managing an uncomfortable conversation he had prepared for in advance. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing," she said evenly. "An explanation is only necessary when someone is still waiting for clarity. I have clarity." Cassius looked down at the pale stone for a moment. "My family pushed for Lillian's alliance. Her father's network connects 4 Eastern packs that we cannot afford to lose access to. It was presented to me as a necessity." "I understand pack politics," Cecilia said. "I should not have said what I said to you last night." She looked at him steadily. "No, you should not have. I genuinely believed you had not." He stopped, started again. "I did not know about the Alpha King. I would never have." "I know," Cecilia said. "You would not have. Not because you would have respected my privacy or chosen kindness, but because you would have been afraid of the consequences." Cassius absorbed that. He looked as if he wanted to object to it, and then thought better of it. "That is fair," he said quietly. "You did not lose me because you chose Lillian Rothwell," Cecilia said, and her voice was calm, the way deep water is calm. Not shallow, not empty, but still all the way down. "You lost me because you enjoyed watching me become smaller. The rejection itself. I could have forgiven that. People choose different partners. Bonds change. But you brought me to that window last night to see if you could make me look like nothing, in front of everyone, on the night of your own celebration. That was not politics. That was something else." Cassius had no answer for that. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the old silver-barked tree. Then Lillian appeared in the doorway of the courtyard. She had dressed carefully for the morning, her auburn hair down and her gown a softer color than the gold of last night. Ivory, which was either a coincidence or a calculation. And with Lillian Rothwell, nothing was a coincidence. She looked at Cecilia with an expression that was almost friendly. "Cecilia," she said pleasantly, "I hope there are no hard feelings between us. I had nothing to do with the circumstances of your previous arrangement with Cassius." "Of course not," Cecilia said. Lillian tilted her head slightly. And I want you to know that whatever rumors have been circulating about you, the things people have been saying about the Alpha King's reluctance to name a Luna, I never contributed to those. Whatever was being said in certain circles originated well before Cassius and I were formally introduced. Cecilia was listening. But she was also noticing something. In certain circles, Lillian had said that phrase with the specific easiness of someone referring to a thing they consider familiar. Not, I heard rumors, or people were saying. She had said certain circles, which meant she knew which circles, which meant she knew who was in them. That is generous of you, Cecilia said. Her tone was warm. I always found it strange that the rumors were so specific. They spoke quite particularly about the Alpha King's indecision, didn't they? As if someone wanted to make the uncertainty about his court sound connected to questions about his Luna. Lillian's expression did not change. Well, rumors are rarely precise. Some of them are remarkably precise, Cecilia said gently, particularly when they come from sources with access to royal correspondence. A brief, almost imperceptible stillness crossed Lillian's face. Your father knows Lawrence Stratford well, doesn't he? Cecilia said. I believe they corresponded about eastern border trade routes last spring. It was a guess, but it was an educated guess, built on 3 months of quiet observation and the pattern she had already begun to see in the archive documents the night before. And Lillian's reaction confirmed it, not with words, but with the slight, involuntary tightening around her eyes that happens when someone realizes they have revealed more than they intended. That is a rather serious implication, Lillian said carefully. It was an observation, Cecilia replied pleasantly. About trade routes. Good morning, Lillian. She walked back toward the hall door. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Behind her, she could hear Cassius asking Lillian something in a low voice, and Lillian's response was quieter than usual, clipped. The tone of someone who has just realized that the conversation they thought they were controlling has been, in fact, controlled by the other person the whole time. Dominic was waiting inside the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the particular patience of a man who has learned not to interrupt Cecilia when she is in the middle of something. The Rothwells and Stratford have a connection, Cecilia said as she reached him. I cannot prove it yet, but Lillian knows about the rumor chain, and she knows it in the specific way you know something you helped build. Dominic straightened. What do you need? The archive, she said, all of it, and Emerson Kensington. I want to speak with him before Lawrence does. The Royal Archive adjoined the north wing of Mooncrest Hall, and was accessible only through a locked iron door that required both a seal impression and a spoken passphrase. Dominic had both. He opened the door without ceremony and let Cecilia go in first. The archive was a long, narrow room that smelled deeply of old paper and the cool mineral sharpness of silver dust, which had been used for decades to preserve the ink on important documents. Tall shelves lined both walls from floor to ceiling, organized in a system that someone long dead had designed, and everyone since had maintained without fully understanding. Silver-sealed report bundles sat in labeled rows beside open ledgers, and folded alliance correspondence, and the long moon bond records that tracked the formal unions of every pack family of consequence. Candles burned in iron holders on the central table. Outside the high, narrow window, storm clouds had moved in during the morning hours, and the light was gray and close, which made the candlelight feel more necessary than ornamental. Willow Carrington arrived a few minutes after them, slipping through the archive door, with the quick, quiet movement of someone who has spent years moving through important rooms without being asked to leave them. Willow was 24, several years younger than Dominic, with the same dark eyes, and a manner that was equal parts sharpness and warmth. She had been one of the 2 witnesses at the Northern Chapel, and had kept the secret as carefully as Cecilia had, which Cecilia had respected from the moment she understood it. Gideon Lancaster came last, closing the door behind him, with the deliberate sound of someone who understands that what happens in the next hour matters. Gideon was one of the few men in the Royal Council who had neither surprised Cecilia nor unsettled her in all the months she had been watching. He was careful and direct in the way of someone who considers honesty a discipline rather than a temperament. They spread the documents across the central table under the candlelight. Cecilia worked systematically, the way she had always worked when something needed to be understood rather than simply processed. She began with the patrol records, sorting them by date and comparing the assigned movements against the border incident reports. Then she pulled the Alliance correspondence and arranged it in a separate line. Willow helped without being asked, passing documents and making quiet notes. Gideon read silently beside her, making his own observations. After an hour, the pattern was clear enough to describe. Every false patrol movement required a document to pass through the senior archives office for authorization, Cecilia said, without looking up from the papers. Every document that passed through the senior archives office in the past 5 months has Emerson Kensington's initials on the transfer record. But the decisions themselves, the actual instruction to move the warriors, those bear Lawrence Stratford's seal at the origination point. She straightened and looked at the table. Lawrence drafted the false orders. Emerson authorized their transfer. But Emerson's initials appear with a consistency that suggests he was processing documents without reading their full content, which means either he trusted the source completely, or he was frightened enough not to ask questions. Or both, Willow said quietly. Possibly both, Cecilia agreed. I do not think Emerson is the architect of this. I think he is a mechanism, a frightened one. Gideon looked across the table at Dominic. If we bring Emerson into a formal accusation before we know how deep his involvement runs, Lawrence will know immediately that we have found the trail. He may move before we can. I know, Dominic said. That is why we speak with Emerson first, quietly, before Lawrence has any reason to reach him. He will not speak freely if he believes he is being investigated, Cecilia said. But he may speak if he believes someone understands the difference between a man who did something wrong willingly and a man who was put in an impossible position. She looked at Dominic. Let me speak with him alone. Dominic held her gaze. She could see the instinct in him, the protective instinct that wanted to put himself between her and any situation that carried risk. She could also see the moment he chose to hold that instinct back, because he had told her last night that she was not someone to be protected from things. She was someone to be trusted with them. I will be in the corridor, he said. Emerson Kensington arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by a brief and unremarkable note, signed with Dominic's seal, but telling him only that a document transfer query required his review. He was a small, precise man in his mid-40s, with thin hands, and the particular complexion of someone who spent the majority of his life indoors, under candlelight. He came through the archive door with the expression of routine, and then stopped when he found Cecilia standing alone at the central table. Miss, my lady. He looked around, visibly recalibrating. Luna, Cecilia said gently. But please don't worry about the form of address. Sit with me for a moment, Emerson. I want to show you something. He came forward cautiously, the way a person approaches something they are not entirely certain is safe, and sat in the chair across from her. She placed one of the altered documents between them, turned so he could read it clearly. She did not accuse him. She simply pointed at the date. This was changed after it left Lawrence Stratford's office, she said. You can see the original impression of the ink. Can you tell me when you last processed a document of this kind? Emerson looked at the document. His hands, flat on the table, tightened very slightly. I process many documents, he said carefully. I know you do, Cecilia said, and I believe you process them in good faith. I believe that when Lord Stratford sends you a transfer authorization, you trust that it has been properly reviewed at the source, because it is not your role to question his origination decisions. That is not a failing of yours. That is the system working as it was designed. Emerson looked at her. He was studying her face for something, a trap, perhaps, or a verdict, and finding neither. What he was finding, she hoped, was simply someone who was telling him what they actually believed. He told me the border reallocations were approved by the Alpha King, Emerson said. His voice was very low. He told me they were time-sensitive and should be processed without the standard secondary review, because the situation was urgent. And the secondary review being bypassed. That happened more than once? 11 times in 5 months. Silence settled over the room. Did you ever see Lord Stratford meet with Raphael Rothwell? Cecilia asked. Emerson was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the storm that had been building all morning released its first sound, a low, distant thunder that moved through the walls of the archive like a held breath being released. "Once," Emerson said, "in the East Wing." They met in the evening, after the council session. I was collecting a document I had forgotten, and the door was not fully closed. I heard Rothwell say that the woman could not be allowed to stand publicly beside the Alpha King until the Eastern vote was settled. Cecilia kept her face calm. And what did Lord Stratford say in response? He said the rumors would continue as long as he maintained access to the family communication channels, Emerson said. He said a rejected Luna was as useful as no Luna at all. The candle between them burned without moving. "Thank you, Emerson," Cecilia said quietly. "You are going to be all right. I need you to write down exactly what you just told me, in your own words, signed and witnessed, and I need you to do it in this room before you speak to anyone else." Emerson nodded. He looked like a man who has been carrying a stone for a very long time, and has finally been offered somewhere to set it down. She went to the door and opened it. Dominic was in the corridor. His expression, as he read hers, went very still. "We have Stratford," she said quietly. "And the Rothwell connection. All of it." She did not have to say, "I told you." He already knew. That night, as she was returning to her chamber in the East Wing, she found something outside her door. A torn silver banner, its edge cleanly cut, folded once. It bore no message, but it had been placed precisely in the center of the doorway, unmissable and deliberate. She picked it up and looked at it for a long time. It was not a threat of violence. It was something more specific than that, a signal. Someone was telling her that they knew she was working in the archive, that they were aware of what she was finding, that the secrecy she had maintained for 3 months was now, itself, being watched. She brought the banner inside and set it carefully on the desk beside the window. Then she sat down and spent the next 2 hours preparing everything she would need for the council session that Dominic had promised her would belong to her. The great moon seal of the Royal Carrington Pack had hung above the council chamber door since the hall's founding, and every wolf who walked beneath it knew what it meant. The words spoken inside were binding. The decisions made inside were final, and the truth presented inside was expected to be exactly that. Lawrence Stratford had sat beneath that seal many times without concern. He had learned, over a long council career, that the seal's authority was only as strong as the people who invoked it, and that people, unlike seals, could be managed. The council session began at midday. Lawrence arrived early and took his customary seat near the head of the council table, the chair that sat 2 positions from Dominic's own, and therefore conveyed, without words, that its occupant had access and weight. He arranged his notes with care. He set his seal ring on the table where it could be seen. He greeted August Vanderbilt warmly, and Gideon Lancaster with the neutral respect of a man who has no particular feelings about someone who has never been particularly useful to him. Raphael Rothwell took a seat along the advisory wall with the other family representatives. His face was controlled, but his eyes were active, moving quickly around the room in the way that tells you someone is performing a rapid accounting of who is present and what that means. Cassius and Lillian sat at the far end of the advisory seating. Cassius looked tired. Lillian looked composed in the careful way of someone who is waiting to see what the room will require before committing to an expression. When Dominic entered, everyone rose. When Cecilia entered at his side, the room's response was visible and varied. Some bowed deeply and immediately. Some took a moment longer, adjusting to the sight of her in the formal Luna position, beside Dominic, not behind him, which was itself a statement. A few looked at Lawrence Stratford, checking his reaction the way people check a senior colleague when they are uncertain what the acceptable response is. Lawrence's face gave them nothing useful. The session opened with standard council business: border security updates, trade route assessments, an alliance renewal with a southern family. Dominic conducted it efficiently, giving nothing away. Cecilia sat beside him and listened to the room and said nothing. Lawrence waited until the standard business was concluded before making his move. He cleared his throat in the precise, intentional way that councilmen use when they wish to signal that they are about to raise something important. "My Lord Carrington," he said, "before we conclude today's session, I wonder if the council might address a matter that has caused some uncertainty among the northern families. Dominic said nothing. He waited. The revelation of a hidden Luna bond, Lawrence said, with the measured tone of someone presenting a reasonable concern, has naturally raised questions about transparency in the royal decision-making process. A bond of this significance, kept from council record for 3 months, creates, I think many here would agree, a question of confidence. The realm deserves to understand how such a significant matter was handled in private. Several council members made the small sounds of agreement that are not quite words, so they can be taken back if necessary. Furthermore, Lawrence continued, one might reasonably ask whether a Luna who was, until last evening, unknown to the council, who has no formal public record in royal affairs, is adequately prepared for the responsibilities the position entails. The northern families have concerns about. Dominic began to rise. Cecilia placed her hand lightly on his wrist. He stopped. He looked at her. She gave him a slight, clear look that said what it needed to say without words. He sat back. Lawrence noticed the exchange and allowed himself, very briefly, to look satisfied. He interpreted it as Cecilia restraining a defensive alpha. He did not interpret it correctly. Cecilia stood. The room adjusted itself for her, not with the instant authority response that it had given Dominic, but with a different kind of attention. The attention given to something unexpected, something they had not calibrated for yet. She did not look at Lawrence directly at first. She looked at the full council, moving her gaze around the table in the way that says, I see all of you, and I want you to know it. The question of preparedness, she said clearly, is a reasonable one, and I will address it fully. She reached into the folder before her and withdrew the first document. Over the past several months, the royal patrol records for the eastern border have been systematically altered, she said. Warriors were reallocated based on transfer authorizations that misrepresented the Alpha King's instructions. These documents created the appearance of royal consent for movements that were never actually ordered. She set the patrol record on the table where the council members near her could see it clearly. Every false authorization originated in the Senior Council Advisory Office, she said. Every document bearing those false authorizations was processed through the Archive Transfer Office under pressure that bypassed standard secondary review. Lawrence made a sound. My lady, this is a very serious— If your record is clean, Lord Stratford, Cecilia said, without changing her tone or her pace, the documents will reflect that. Please, let me finish. Silence, she continued. At the same time these patrol records were being altered, a coordinated effort was made to distribute specific rumors about the Alpha King's unwillingness to publicly name a Luna. These rumors were targeted at noble families and pack elders, the exact people whose confidence in the throne would most affect political stability. She withdrew the second document, the sealed alliance letter with the altered date. This letter was sent to suggest that Eastern Pack leadership had been in contact with the Alpha King's allies before the border incident, establishing a fabricated timeline. The actual date of the correspondence, visible in the original ink impression, contradicts the altered date by 17 days. She held it toward the nearest council member so he could examine it. The purpose of these combined actions was to divide the Crown's military focus and simultaneously undermine confidence in the royal court's stability. A court that appears both militarily uncertain and personally undecided is a court that can be opposed, and the opposition, as the documents will show, had a specific beneficiary in mind. Lawrence pushed back his chair slightly. My Lord Carrington, I must object. The council has not recognized you to speak, Lawrence, Dominic said. His voice was very quiet. It did not need to be anything else. Lawrence sat back. The door at the side of the chamber opened, and Emerson Kensington entered. He was pale and very precise in the way of a person who has made a decision they know will cost them and has decided to pay. He carried a sealed statement, which he placed before Gideon Lancaster, who read it briefly and passed it to the council members on either side of him. I processed 11 transfer authorizations under instruction from Lord Stratford, Emerson said. I was told they were approved by the Alpha King. I was also instructed to bypass the secondary review on each occasion. I have never personally falsified a document. I have a record of every authorization I processed, and the circumstances under which I processed it. The council chamber was very quiet. Lawrence made one more attempt. His voice, for the first time, carried the particular tension of someone who has run out of prepared ground. The woman is emotional. She is new to the royal court and has arrived with a narrative that the Luna presented evidence, Gideon Lancaster said. You have presented objections to her manner. The council deals in the former. Cecilia withdrew the final document. This is a sealed correspondence between Lord Stratford and a representative of a rival alpha from the Western Lowlands, she said. It was written 4 months ago. In it, Lord Stratford signals his willingness to support a challenge to the Carrington throne in exchange for a position in the new council structure, contingent on the current Alpha King's court appearing divided and unstable. She set it down. The court was not divided, she said. It was being made to look divided. There is a difference, and the difference is these documents. The council turned toward Lawrence Stratford. Lawrence looked at the table. He looked at the sealed letter. He looked at Emerson Kensington. He looked, finally, at Raphael Rothwell, who was sitting against the advisory wall with an expression that told Cecilia everything. Rothwell had already decided, in the past 30 seconds, that Lawrence was no longer someone he needed to protect. It was the expression of a man removing himself from a ship he has decided is sinking. Dominic rose. Lawrence Stratford is removed from the Royal Council, effective immediately, he said. His correspondence and archive access are suspended pending a full review. Raphael Rothwell is requested to remain in Mooncrest Hall as a cooperative witness in the broader inquiry, or face formal summons. He looked at Cecilia. The council recognizes the Luna's contribution to this investigation as complete, accurate, and essential. It was formal language, but the way he said it was not formal. It was the way you speak about something you believe deeply. That happens also to be something the room needed to hear in official terms. Cecilia stood at the council table and felt the weight of the past 3 months complete itself, not with relief, exactly, and not with satisfaction exactly, but with the particular sensation of a thing that has finally been permitted to be what it was. She looked at Lillian Rothwell, who was sitting very still in the advisory seats. She did not feel anger toward Lillian. She felt something quieter and more permanent. The clear recognition that the rumors, the whispers, the manufactured image of a rejected and unwanted woman, all of that had been designed by people who needed her to appear powerless, because she was not. A powerless woman would not have found the pattern in the documents. A powerless woman would not have spoken in the council chamber. A powerless woman would have gone home from the Great Hall the night before, and cried in private, and waited for the world to change around her. Cecilia Ellington had never been powerless. She had simply been, for a brief and strategic time, invisible. There was a difference, and now everyone in the room understood it. The Mooncrest Assembly was called for the evening of the same day. It was not unusual for the Alpha King to address a full gathering following a significant council decision. What was unusual was the specific quality of silence in the hall as it filled, the way people arranged themselves, giving slightly more room than usual, as if the air itself had become something that deserved respect, and the fact that absolutely everyone who had been present the previous night had found a reason to return. Florence Lancaster had spent the better part of the afternoon reviewing, by Cecilia's estimate, every comment she had made in the past 11 months. The review showed on her face. Maeve Wentworth stood near the central fireplace and had perfected, in the past 24 hours, the expression of a woman who has always thought highly of Cecilia Ellington and simply never had the opportunity to say so publicly. Cassius stood near the eastern wall with the particular stillness of a man who is not performing anything, because everything he was accustomed to performing has recently become unavailable. Lillian was present, but quieter. The ivory gown was gone. She wore dark green, which was either coincidence or an instinctive dress down. Her father Raphael stood a careful distance away from her, already beginning the work of separating himself from what the inquiry would find. The great moon-carved ceiling was lit tonight, with more candles than usual, and the silver wolf banners had been replaced with the royal Carrington banners, black and silver, the crescent moon and the running wolf, which was a formality that announced, in the visual language of pack tradition, that what happened here tonight had royal weight. Cecilia stood in the east corridor and heard the hall filling, and breathed slowly. Willow appeared at her shoulder and adjusted the pin at her throat. The silver moon crescent, now outside her cloak, visible and deliberate. Willow's hands were quick and careful, and entirely warm. "Ready?" Willow said. "Yes," Cecilia said. She meant it. The doors opened. She walked in beside Dominic, and the hall received them the way the hall the previous night had not been prepared to receive her. Fully, formally, every head inclining, every body recognizing. The sound of 200 wolves acknowledging their Luna was not loud. It was deep. It ran through the stone floor, and up through the soles of her shoes, and settled in her chest, beside the bond that had been living there quietly for 3 months. They walked the length of the hall together, not with urgency, not with performance. Simply walking, the way two people walk when they know where they are going, and do not feel the need to prove it with speed. Dominic stopped at the head of the hall before the great silver and black banners and addressed the gathering. "Last evening," he said, "this hall witnessed a truth it was not expecting. This evening, I want to be clear about what that truth means." He spoke evenly, his voice carried without effort. "The Luna bond between myself and Cecilia Ellington was kept from public record for a period of 3 months, by deliberate decision, for reasons of court security. I want to state plainly that this decision did not arise from hesitation, doubt, or any uncertainty about the bond or the person I had chosen. It arose from a threat inside this court that has now been addressed." He paused for a moment. Cecilia kept this secret without complaint. She walked through this realm for 3 months while rumors were manufactured about her. And she did not defend herself publicly, because she understood that the exposure of a larger danger was more important. What she gave up in those 3 months, the recognition, the standing, the simple dignity of being publicly known for who she was, I will not pretend was a small thing. It was not. The hall was absolutely still. The Luna of the Royal Carrington pack deserved to stand in every room she entered, exactly as she was. She deserved that before last night. She was worthy of it before any of you knew her name. He turned to her, not toward the room, toward her specifically. "The floor is yours," he said quietly. Cecilia looked at the assembled hall. She looked at the faces she had studied for years, the families, the elders, the women who had whispered, the men who had assumed, the young wolves who were watching from the back rows with open and uncertain faces, not sure yet what they were supposed to feel. She chose to speak to the ones who were uncertain. "A woman can be quiet and still be listening," she said. "She can be patient and still be building. She can be mocked and still be right about herself." Her voice was clear. It did not tremble, and it did not perform. "The whispers about me were not created by truth. They were created by people who needed me to appear small, so that the crown would appear unstable. That strategy failed, not because I was protected by a powerful alpha, but because a lie, no matter how many voices carry it, eventually meets the records. And records do not adjust themselves to protect the people who made them." She looked, briefly, at the place where Lawrence Stratford had been standing the night before. The place was empty now. It made a kind of statement all its own. "I am not standing here this evening to collect apologies for past insults. I am standing here because the realm is stronger when it learns to see clearly, when it stops mistaking silence for surrender, and public rejection for private failure, and a woman who has been underestimated for a woman who can be dismissed." She let that land. "I was never dismissed. I was simply not yet visible." A sound moved through the hall. Not applause, something quieter and more genuine than applause. The sound of a room full of people, recalibrating something they thought they already understood. Florence Lancaster looked at her hands. Maeve Wentworth's eyes were bright, with something that might have been discomfort, and might have been genuine feeling, possibly both. Cassius was looking at the carved moon ceiling, in the way of someone who is working through something that requires more thought than the present moment allows. After the formal assembly concluded, as the gathering moved into the quieter social hour of food and wine and careful conversation, Cassius found Cecilia near the western window, the same window where he had asked his question the night before. He stood a respectful distance away, and said nothing for a moment. "I owe you more than an apology," he said finally. "You do not need to say it as debt," Cecilia replied. "Say it because you mean it, or do not say it at all." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I was wrong about you. I told myself a version of who you were that was convenient for the choices I had already made. It was easier than admitting that what I was leaving behind was more than I was gaining." Cecilia looked at him. She felt no longing. She felt no anger anymore either. Anger had burned clean through in the past months, and left something cooler and clearer in its place. She felt, if she were honest, a mild and genuine sadness for him. Not the sad of loss, but the sad of waste, of a person who had chosen an arrangement over an understanding, and would spend a long time quietly aware of the difference. "I accept it," she said. "And I wish you well with Lillian. I mean that." She did mean it. Cecilia had never wanted anyone to be unhappy. She had only ever wanted to stop being the instrument through which someone else performed their happiness. Cassius nodded once. He did not push further. Whatever he had expected from this conversation, absolution perhaps, or a window back to something, he had read clearly enough to understand that the window was closed, not with anger, simply closed. He walked back toward the eastern side of the hall. Cecilia turned to the window. Outside, the moon was full and hanging very low above the Moonvale forest, the same forest she had run through as a girl, the same dark silver pines she had looked at from this window the night before, when Cassius was asking his question, and the room was arranging itself to witness her humiliation. The forest looked the same as it always had. She was the difference. She was still looking at it when she felt Dominic arrive at her shoulder. He stood close, not formally, not the way he stood in council rooms and assemblies, but the way he had stood in the northern chapel, present and particular, in the way of someone who is not performing company, but actually providing it. "The gathering is beginning to wind down," he said. "I know." A moment of easy quiet between them. Outside, the wind moved through the pine tops and made a soft sound that carried, faintly, through the thick walls. "I need to tell you something," Dominic said. "Tell me." "Hiding the bond was the right strategic decision," he said. "I believe that now, as much as I believed it 3 months ago. But it was also the hardest thing I have ever asked of someone I care about. And I am aware that those two things can both be true." Cecilia looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. The candlelight behind them made the reflection soft and warm. "They can both be true," she agreed. "I know that. I have known it the whole time. I promised you the council session," he said. "I will keep every other promise I make to you with the same completeness." She turned from the window to look at him directly. "I do not need promises of protection," she said. "I need what you gave me in that council chamber. Room to stand, and the certainty that when I am standing, you are beside me rather than in front of me." Dominic's expression was the one she had come to know as his honest expression, stripped of the authority and the control and the specific gravity of the Alpha King, and simply the face of a man who means what he is about to say. "That is exactly what you will have," he said. "For every room, for every year." Cecilia looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. Outside, the Moonvale forest stretched wide and dark and permanent under the full moon, and the light on the pine tops was silver and clean, and the world looked, from this window, like a place in which things could be right. Dominic stood beside her, not performing anything, not managing anything, simply present, the way something permanent is present, not loudly, not dramatically, but without question. She reached out and placed her hand over his, where it rested on the windowsill. They stood that way together while the hall behind them continued its evening business, and the candles burned down their slow degrees, and the old moon-carved ceiling above them recorded the moment in its 200-year way, silently, completely, and without commentary. Cecilia Ellington had once been the woman people called brave, for attending a gathering where she was expected to feel small. She was not that woman anymore. She was the woman who had stood in a room full of powerful people and shown them what they had missed. The woman who had read the documents no one else could read. The woman who had walked into the council chamber and done what the council chamber required. The woman who had been chosen by the only Alpha whose crown could make the entire kingdom kneel, and who had been loved, more importantly, by the one man powerful enough to stand beside her and let her rise on her own. Cassius Pembroke had laughed at her from across a room and asked, in front of witnesses, if she was still unmated. He had not known that 3 months earlier, in an old stone chapel in the north, with a silver flame between them, and the ancient words settling into her bones like roots, Cecilia had already said yes to the man standing next to her now. She had said yes before the court knew her name. She had said yes before the council recognized her voice. She had said yes before the great hall of Mooncrest bowed to her, and before Lawrence Stratford was removed from his seat, and before Florence Lancaster reviewed her whispers, and before Lillian Rothwell's smile went still. She had said yes when the only audience was a silver flame and 2 people who understood what they were committing to. That was always the only audience that mattered.